Okay, in this video, we're going to talk about strategy and tactics for doing proofs. Now, before we get to the material that's given to you in our book, I want to give you two basic principles of skills you're going to need to do proofs and show you how it works. And then I'll kind of step back and say a little bit more about what we were doing. So let's use this example that we were given to us in the last section. You've got these premises, 1 through 4, and you're supposed to prove from that Q is true. How are you going to do that? I have two tips for you. The first is absolutely essential. You must memorize all of the implication rules. Why? Because unless you know those rules and you have them in your head, you won't see the possibilities that are open to you. You've got pieces on the board, but you don't know where you can move. You've got to know in your head all the ways that you could move the pieces around this board. You've got to memorize them. Secondly, here's the big overall strategy. You're going to try to think backwards from the conclusion. You know, if you see premises like this, you might just start by saying, okay, well, what rules can I apply? What can I do? Well, you can do a lot of stuff here maybe, and you might, as you stumble forward applying rules, you might accidentally light upon the conclusion that you need. But you could go a lot of different ways. Because truthfully, there's a lot of different things you might be able to infer from a given set of premises, and you only need one conclusion. How do you know you're going in the right direction? The answer is you have to think backwards from the final conclusion. Let me explain what I mean. You're given these premises, you know in the end, you've got to get to Q, right? Now, ask yourself, where do I see Q, that conclusion, somehow inside the premises that I'm given? Where do you see a Q in 1 through 4? That's right. You see it in line 4. It is the consequent of a conditional statement. Now, if you know your rules, then you will know that there is a rule which allows you to prove, to derive the consequent of a conditional statement. What rule is that? Yes, it's modus ponens. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to start at the very end, and you're going to say, okay, I know that I'm going to apply modus ponens to line 4 to get Q out of it. But there's a problem. Modus ponens doesn't just require you to have this conditional statement. There's another premise that you're going to need as well if you want to apply modus ponens. What is the other premise that you need? That's right. You have to have the antecedent of that conditional statement. I can only get the consequent out of line 4 by modus ponens if I also have as a premise not P. If not P, then Q. Now, that means somehow I'm now going to have to prove not P is true before I can prove that Q is true. All right, so how am I going to prove not P? Apply the same procedure. Ask yourself, where do I see not P or anything like it in my premises? Where? You might say, well, I see it in line 4. Yeah, but you're not going to be able to get it out of line 4. You're going to, that's not going to work because that's the very premise that you're using. So where else do you see not P? Well, you don't see not P, but you do see P in line 2, right? Now, again, if you know your rules, if they are written in your heart, then it will dawn on you there is a rule that will allow me to prove the negation of the antecedent of a conditional. What rule is that? That's right, friends. It's modus tollens. Good job. I'm so glad you've already memorized so much. Now, if I want to prove not P from line 2, I'm going to need another premise. I can't just go directly from line 2 to not P. What is the other premise I'm going to need? That's right. I'm going to need the negation of the consequence. Somehow I'm going to need not S. So now how am I going to get the not S? Apply the same procedure. Look for not S in the premises. Where do you see it? Oh, I see it. It's in line 3. Now, what rule will allow you to get a disjunct out of a disjunction? Because that's what line 3 is. It's a disjunction. What rule will do it for you? That's right, disjunctive syllogism. But again, there's another premise we're going to need if we're going to apply disjunctive syllogism to line 3. What are we going to need? We are going to need the negation of the other disjunct. We're going to need not R. Well, do I need to put in not R here and try to prove it? I don't have to. Guess what? Not R has already been given to me. I can just say, line 1, there it is. And now, when I get to that point where I don't even have to prove another premise to connect the dots, I'm done. Now all I've got to do is fill in the line numbers. I have proven everything I needed. So I know that this is line 5. And so, and then this is going to be line 6. This is line 7. And so the first thing I did was I proved not S by disjunctive syllogism, and I proved not P from 2 and from 5 by modus tollens. And then I concluded to Q from 4 and line 6 by modus ponens. So that to completely enter it, you're going to have to fill in your line numbers and the line numbers are here in the justification column. Why didn't I do that at the beginning? Why did I do it at the end? Because I didn't know how many lines it was going to take me to complete the proof. I don't know until I've connected the dots. Now I want you to see the basic moves I was doing. My strategy is work backwards in the conclusion. And then I apply my tactics, which is find my conclusion buried in one of the premises and apply a rule that will allow me to get that conclusion out of the premises. That's my basic strategy and tactics. So here's how they say it in our book. Your tactic is to use the rules of inference. Those are like small scale maneuvers. Your big picture overall strategy is to derive the conclusion from the premises. Now, making a proof, doing natural deduction, it's a creative process. As you can see, you've got to do the thinking about how am I going to connect the dots. And a lot of times, there's more than one logically valid way to derive the same conclusion. Sometimes one way is faster than the other, but there's often many different ways. And for our purposes, as long as you prove the conclusion validly, you're good. In some classes, I might demand that you prove it in the shortest and easiest way. I don't care. Just get there validly, you're good to go. That's true in the homework as well. So your strategy is to locate the conclusion somehow inside the premises. If the conclusion is the consequent of a conditional premise, then try to prove it using modus ponens. If it's the antecedent of a conditional premise, then try to prove it using modus tollens. If the conclusion that you are trying to prove is a conditional statement, then hypothetical syllogism is a rule which will give you a conditional statement as the conclusion. And if the conclusion that you're trying to prove is a disjunct, it's one part of a disjunction, then try proving it using disjunctive syllogism. But in order to kind of see the possibilities there on the page, you've got to just know those rules cold, the argument forms and how they're applied. So here's another example. Let's say you're given these premises and you're supposed to prove the conclusion if R then P. Now, first step, do you see if R then P in any of the premises? No, you don't. But you see pieces. I mean, you see the R is here in line 3, and there's the P in line 2. All right, how am I going to get that, that conclusion? Well, think about your tactics. If the conclusion you need is a conditional statement, and that conditional statement is not already embedded in the premises, then you're going to get there using hypothetical syllogism, right? So to use hypothetical syllogism, what are you going to need to do? Well, you're actually going to need 2 other conditionals. You're going to need to prove, if you could prove this, if S, then P, and you could prove this, if R, then S, then you could use hypothetical syllogism to get if R, then P. But you can't just do that directly, because these are the consequence of conditionals. So here's the steps that you're going to follow. So first of all, okay, I'm somehow going to use hypothetical syllogism to get my conclusion. Now, how am I going to get, if S then P, or if R then S? Well, these are the consequence of conditionals. What rule will give you the consequence of a conditional? Modus ponens. Can I apply modus ponens? Well, yeah, look, I can do that to both of them. I've got if Q, then all that. I've got Q. I've got if L, then all that. Well, I've got L, so I can do 2 applications of modus ponens, and I've got the premises I need from which to apply hypothetical syllogism and get my final conclusion. Now, I find it easiest to work these out using pencil and paper, because it makes it easier for me to work backwards. And so I would recommend you do that on your homework. And a couple other tips about homework. The program that we have is great because you can check each line of the proof checker to make sure that the moves you're making are valid. However, it's not super easy to work backwards. So I find it easier to work out the proof on pencil and paper, then enter it into the proof checker, check it line by line, and then submit it. So enjoy your homework.